Thank you guys for joining us today. This is our IndigoEdge series, and this topic is something called ColorUp. And yeah, it's our fifth IndigoEdge series, so it's been pretty fun doing this over the last year and a half or two. I am Matt Richardson. I'm one of the co-owners of Indigo Ink. Liz and I started Indigo Ink 21 years ago, and it's been a fun journey. I started it. I was 28, and I'm turning 50 this year. So it's been many decades that I've enjoyed running this business. Um, we're also joined by Alex. He's our lead press operator. He's our chief of R&D and just the general mad scientist in residence. And we're really thankful that so many of you have signed up and taken the time to learn with us today. Quick housekeeping. For now, we just ask that everybody keeps their mic on mute during the session. If you have any questions or concerns during the presentation, Liz is going to keep an eye on the chat function, and she'll let us know if we need to do anything based on any concerns. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A, and if you have questions, you can raise your hand, and we'll answer you. And also, just so you know, we're recording this session and we'll put it on YouTube in about a week. And everybody who registered for this session will get a link so they can get to the recording. And you'll see our very small but growing YouTube channel. In case you haven't done it and visited on the YouTube channel, there is an old shop tour. It'll give you a quick overview of some of the equipment that we have and what we do here. You'll see a couple of the shop puppies that run around here. They're really dogs, but also, in case you don't know, we're in Maryland. We just mentioned that, and we're a eco-friendly, wind-powered, people-powered printing company. We have a really amazing team of pretty fun, creative people who love paper, they love print, and they're really good at problem solving. One of the fun things we do a lot of is R&D to help our clients to come up with new ideas. And people ask us all the times is if something will work, and sometimes we say, I don't know, let's play with it and figure it out. In fact, we're working right now with one of our greeting card customers on a really cool idea. Can't say what it is, but it's a really cool idea, and we think we figured it out yesterday, and I'm really excited.
It's really sick.
Yeah. Now I know everybody wants to know what it is. Sorry. So yeah, today we're going to talk about ColorUp. It's a really neat thing we can do on our HP Indigo. And Alex is the one that discovered this through his R&D. And it's something that we've been able to use. And Alex is going to dig into this, but we've been able to use it to hit a wider color gamut. So also, I think most of you should have received a sample packet in the mail. And so, yeah, Alex has it right there. So he'll be talking about some of these prints throughout the webinar. And I believe there should be files online, Liz, that they can download. Okay, not for this one because this one's so easy.
Not for this one because there's no file setup required.
Right. This one's easy. You guys are going to like how easy this is. Cool. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Alex right now. Take it away, Alex.
You got it. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I am really excited to dive into today's topic. It's deceptively simple, with a whole tangled mess of science underneath, which makes it exactly the kind of thing I get really invested in. Blame my parents for my strict upbringing on PBS, Discovery, and Sci-Fi Channel. But we're going to have to go back, way back. Carl Sagan once said, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. But there's another quote I think might be more appropriate to kick things off. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. We need to start with the basics, and that's not nearly as simple as it sounds. See, color is complicated. Actually, saying color is complicated really undersells the issue. No matter how complicated you think color might be, it's almost certainly more complicated than that. And once you start putting ink on a page, it gets even worse. Very few people can claim to know everything, and I certainly won't pretend to. But to discuss our topic for today, we need to have a basic understanding of color. And at the heart of all of this is color theory. So that's where we're going to start. Now, for any of you who have had to take a class on color theory, you have my sympathy. It's not so much a learning curve as it is a cliff that you repeatedly throw yourself against. But I'm going to try to present it in a way that I've never seen done before, as part of a narrowly focused and vastly simplified crash course that will get us to where we need to be. So let's begin. This is the electromagnetic spectrum. You may remember it from high school science class, and then there's a good chance you never had to think about it again. Within this swath of electromagnetic radiation is much of the useful energy that we experience as part of our universe, from the radio waves that carry your favorite music, to the gamma rays we use to treat cancer, and everything in between. The vast majority of this cosmic color spectrum we can't see. Human eyes are limited, and since I can't print gamma rays, we can safely ignore most of this. We're interested in this tiny band here in the middle. This is the rainbow we know and love, making up every color that we can see. Technically, this is known as the visible color spectrum, and it encompasses every pure wavelength of light that the human eye can perceive, from the deep near-infrared of a heat lamp, to the blinding green of a laser pointer, to the almost painful purple of a blacklight. It's also not a particularly useful way to understand how colors relate to one another, and you'll notice there are some important things missing, like white, pink, and brown. This scale represents only what are known as spectral colors, which are made up of a single wavelength of light. That's your Roy G. Biv. To fix that, we need to adjust our scale a little bit, and make some space. This is the CIE 1931 XY chromaticity diagram, which is a long, confusing name that nobody uses outside of scientific research papers. Everyone else calls it the visible color space. This is a true representation of human vision, including white and extraspectral colors formed by the combination of multiple wavelengths. This includes brown, pink, magenta, and cyan. You'll also notice green seems overrepresented, and this is because our eyes are more sensitive to green light than other colors. Take two laser pointers of equal power, one red, one green, and the green will far outshine the red, simply because the rods and cones in the back of your eye are more sensitive to that color. We'll circle back to that in a moment. But some colors are harder to make than others, and the nice thing about this diagram is that we can map out the colors that any given technology can produce. Take this, for example. This is the Adobe RGB color space, created in 1998 to define a range of color that Adobe believed could be produced on a printer. There's a long, complicated story about how and why they got it wrong, but Adobe RGB still exists because plenty of designers like the brighter colors they see on the screen, and it stuck. For comparison, this is the sRGB color space, the modern standard for designing anything that will be viewed on a screen. You'll notice it's smaller than the Adobe version. When shopping for a computer monitor, you'll often find displays advertising how much of the Adobe RGB color space they can reach, because 27 years after Adobe came up with it, that big spike of green there is still hard to reproduce. Let's understand what's happening here.
Hey, Alex, I'm just gonna, sorry, just jump in real quick. Can everybody see this, what Alex is showing on the screen? Okay, there's a couple no's.
See, yes, 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 no, no.
Most people have visibility.
It's possible that you might need to go in the upper right corner where it says view. You may have to change that to standard or speaker.
And if you can't, if that doesn't work, maybe leave the meeting and we'll let you back in.
Yeah, my preview here looks okay. So if anybody's
Yeah,
having issues,
yeah.
just see what we can do.
Thanks for bringing that up. There's a couple folks that aren't able to see it. Sorry to interrupt you, Alex.
Yeah,
No worries.
I have never experienced that. Worst case scenario, we will send this to you and you will get to see
Yeah,
it. Hopefully, this week that gets fixed.
yeah. So Liz will let you back in if you leave the meeting and come back in.
Okay, we'll go
All
ahead and
right.
pick.
Yeah, we'll pick up. Sorry, guys.
No worries. So let's understand what's happening here. Human eyes contain rods and cones. Most everyone remembers that from school, and much like the electromagnetic spectrum, they've never had to think about it ever again. To refresh your memory, rods handle low light vision. There are a lot of them, but they're not very sensitive to color, and that's why you can see at night, but everything appears in shades of gray. We're more interested in the cones. Cones work best in bright light and are divided into three types. L cones react to red light, M cones react to green light, and S cones to blue light. When stimulated, each cone sends electrical signals to the brain, which interprets the specific mixture to form a color image. When all of the cones are fully stimulated, your brain interprets that overload as white light. It's best not to think too hard about the implications of this, or you'll find yourself wondering, is brown a real color? What is purple? And am I seeing the same color as the person next to me? You're not, and that's okay. In a nutshell, this is how computer screens work. Each pixel contains a red, green, and blue sub-pixel element. By varying the brightness and ratio of those colors, we can produce many more. The catch here, of course, is that printers don't use RGB because we can't print photons. Looking at the additive color wheel, you might notice something interesting. The secondary colors on this diagram are cyan, yellow, and magenta. And you can probably see how all of this is going to come together. Subtractive color theory is kind of like the rebellious gothy sibling of additive color. Rather than blasting unicorns of pure wavelength into your eyes, we start with all of our available light up front as that messy overload of white, and then whittle the rainbow down through a filter medium, ink in this case, before reflecting just the parts we want off of the paper below. Like pixels, we expand the available colors by changing the density and ratio of our primaries, in this case cyan, yellow, and magenta. Increasing the density of each ink will reduce the light coming back to your eye. That's why there's no real benefit to going beyond a certain percentage of rich black. Once all of the light has been absorbed, you can't remove any more. The flip side of this coin is that subtractive color is an inherently lossy process. You can't add the light back in once it's been absorbed. As a consequence, the color space of a CMYK process will always be smaller than RGB. We just have less light to work with, and therefore less color. The brighter the color, the less likely it is that a 4-color process will be able to achieve it. Color spaces can have some weird implications. Pantone swatch books are an industry standard, but the Pantone color space exceeds the CMYK color space, which is why they tell you to spend a few $100s every year on a new bridge swatch to see how a formulated spot color will look when converted to a process color. And this is the tip of the iceberg. We've touched on 4 common color spaces, but there are a lot. I mean, seriously, just an absurd number. Some are bigger, some are smaller, each has a purpose, and none of them solve the problem of fitting more colors in a box that can't hold them all. There are no shortage of ways to get around this, and there are all sorts of extended gamut inks to push the reproducible color space in one direction or another. One common choice is the addition of orange, green, and violet, which fill in some of the tricky secondary colors and allow for more combinations. Our own Epson wide format printer uses 10 colors, including 2 types of black and 3 types of gray, for better and more subtle gradients, photographs, and skin tones. And that's before you get to the weird stuff. If there's interest, we might schedule a future webinar on some of those applications. Ultimately, everything is a trade-off. We could set our press up to use orange, green, and violet inks, or with lighter shades of black, cyan, and magenta, but our press only has 7 ink stations, and that would mean we couldn't use white or silver or any of the fun special effects that we like to play with. HP does make a 12-color press. It's 50 feet long, about $6 million, and for some reason Liz won't buy me one. Maybe someday. That brings us to ColorUp, which is a way for us to have our cake and eat it too. When we send files to our press, there's a very fancy, very expensive computer in the middle called a digital front end. The DFE splits the file into color separations based on a whole lot of complicated math. For most printing presses, this is a 4-color process with separations for cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. Our press can use up to 16 separations across 7 inks, so things can get pretty crazy. Put simply, ColorUp takes RGB files and adds up to 3 additional separations, cyan, magenta, and yellow, doubling up on the ink density and pushing the color saturation beyond the traditional CMYK color space. In practice, the ColorUp process is file dependent. Going back to our diagram, the color is looking specifically for colors in this range, outside the CMYK color space, but inside the RGB color space. If it finds them, it adds an additional separation. This means that if there are no intense blues, no cyan separation will be added. If there are no greens, the yellow will be left out, and so on. As a result, not every file will benefit from the extra color, and if used on a file with neutral tones, there will be no effect at all. You can also see why the blues and greens are more dramatically impacted than the reds and the oranges. There's simply more color in that direction for the press to reach towards. But when given the right file, the results can be amazing. You can see some of this in action if you look at the back of your samples. Europa has no additional yellow separation, and the tiny wisp of magenta there is so slight it might not even exist. And that's not a mistake, the file just doesn't need any more. That hint of red is accentuated by the additional separation, not overwhelmed. A little goes a long way in this process. To use ColorUp, all we need is an RGB file. Don't worry too much about what RGB color space you're designing in. I've tried most of them, and the press converts them all in a very similar fashion. Clever separation magic aside, there's only so far we can push the color. To check if your file is RGB, there are a few places to look. If you're sending us a PDF, pull up the output preview in Acrobat. That's this icon here, and then change the Show drop-down menu to RGB. Any parts of the file that remain on screen are in the RGB color space. If parts disappear, you have a mix of RGB and CMYK, and if the whole thing goes white, it's probably all in CMYK. In Photoshop, go to Image and Mode and check what color space you're working in. You can toggle directly between color spaces here, or you can convert the file under Edit and Convert to change to a new profile. Either is going to work fine for this process. In Illustrator, it's the same principle. Navigate to File and Document Color Mode and make sure RGB is checked. It's always best to design in RGB from the start. That way you have the full color space at your disposal, but you can change the file to RGB after the fact, although it may have some unintended effects on the color. To see what this looks like when pushed to extremes, take a look at this file from artist Marty Bauman. Marty designed in sRGB, using maxed out green, blue, and pink values across the designs. When squeezed into a CMYK gamut, the colors died and the art fell flat. Not to be deterred by something as trivial as the laws of physics, we started exploring other options and landed on a combination of ColorUp, metallic highlights, and fluorescent pink ink. And then we double hit the black, just for fun. The final results speak for themselves. For those of you counting along at home, here's how the breakdown looks. We have 4 layers of white, 2 of silver, 2 of cyan, 2 of yellow, 2 of magenta, 2 of black, and 2 of fluorescent pink, for a total of 16 layers of ink and one seriously blinding print. No other printing press on the planet can pull off that trick. ColorUp can be a lot of fun. And we've seen some incredibly cool results that truly push the boundaries of what we thought our press could do. It's always a good idea to run a proof if you think you have a file that could benefit. The results can vary, and there is a risk of losing fine details in gradients, shadows, and highlights. I'd also be remiss if I didn't note that this process does cost a little more than standard 4-color printing, but not by very much, especially when compared to using fancy spot colors. We're always happy to consult if you'd like an opinion, and I'm always looking for new and exciting ways to break the press, so if you have something really out there, let us know. There's a good chance we'll already know the answer, and if we don't, we'll find out. I'll open things up to questions. We've left plenty of time, so don't feel like you need to keep it to ColorUp.
Thank you, Alex. That was I felt like I was watching the Discovery Channel, learning about how eyeballs work. But really cool. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? This is a process we've been playing around with for quite some time, and we've, like Alex said in the presentation, we've had some really amazing results. Mostly when we have a file that we can't get the brightness that a client's looking for. Using ColorUp has helped in the past. One note about ColorUp is because it adds an additional, 3 hits of ink most of the time, does increase the cost a little bit. It's not, an insane amount, but it just, it adds a little bit to the cost. It's more ink. And the other beauty of this whole process is there's really not a lot of file setup. When you output your files and you save them as an RGB file, our software, the fancy, expensive computer that Alex mentioned, handles everything. That last sample that he showed you with all the white and the metallic, CMYK and fluorescent pink, that's that one does require some special setup. That was kind of one of the R&D projects that we did. And I think at the time we had we had fluorescent pink ink available. I don't know, Alex, what's the status of the fluorescents from HP?
We can still get the fluorescent pink. I actually do have that in the building right now. The other fluorescents were discontinued, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So no more green.
Yeah, we did a fun, many fun experiments using fluorescent ink on the press, and those are inks that we have to buy from HP. And some of them worked great, some of them didn't, but eventually it just wasn't a good business model for HP, so they discontinued everything, like Alex said, except for the fluorescent pink. That really does make a difference. It's bright. All right, so we have a question in here. With this much ink, do you ever max out total area coverage, or does the paper substrate ever respond negatively or poorly, like ink muddling, ink smudging, ink transfer, et cetera? And I think that's a great question.
That's
Alex,
a fantastic question.
What's your experience, Alex?
So with standard ColorUp, generally no. The way that the digital front end, that computer works, it calculates the maximum ink coverage, and it will take those densest areas and kind of rein them in. I have our press kind of pushed as far as we can reasonably take it with the maximum ink coverage that it'll permit before we start having problems. So standard ColorUp works great across the board, never had any issues. When you start getting into the really crazy stuff, like with the white and the metallic and the extra colors, that was tricky. We had to slow the machine way, way down just to give it enough time to dry in there. But with standard ColorUp, it's maybe 15% slower, and that's just so it has time to put those additional separations on there.
Okay. Very cool. Another question here. Do you find that different file output types can affect color differently for printing?
Yes, they can. So color management it's a rabbit hole. Your choice of color space, your choice of rendering intent, ICC profile, there's a lot that can go into it, and it is a complicated topic because there's stuff you can do on your side, there's stuff I can do on my side. There's the way that the computer interprets the file, the way that the press outputs it, the way that you save it. Short answer is yes. Long answer is that's another webinar.
Got it. I know in the past, when we did some testing, Alex, we noticed that certain types of artwork work better than others, and some don't look good at all. And if I remember correctly, one of the things that we found didn't work well was photos of people. Is that right?
Yeah. So
Did that work well?
one of the kind of limitations of ColorUp that we found is that it can have some kind of odd effects on neutral skin tones. So if you have something like a photograph, generally that's not quite as well suited unless the photograph is reliant on those extreme colors. If it's a mix of, extreme colors and then skin tones and things like that, there's a shift across the entire image that can apply to those skin tones as well. It's not bad necessarily, but it may not be screen accurate.
Gotcha.
That's why we recommend proofing it.
Yeah, definitely. And since it's all digital, proofing is pretty easy. Especially, I mean, Alex is able to, send one file to the press, and as CMYK, and then another file is RGB, and we can compare the two, kind of like the samples you have. That way, we can see if it's going to work or make a difference. We can send a photo, or we can just mail the proofs. Somebody asked, and Taylor asked a good question: can this be paired with metallic ink and digital foil? The answer is yes. Metallic ink for sure. Digital foil, it can work with digital foil, but that's kind of the same challenges with digital foil. The paper stock needs to be in smoother paper, and the foil and the ink can't touch. But we can also do traditional foil stamping. I think maybe a lot of you know this, but we bought a traditional foil stamper last year, and so that kind of expanded everything that we can do when it comes to foil. So we can definitely do both together. Okay. So we have one follow-up question. Between cyan, magenta, and yellow inks, is there one that you find that is more effective? And the example is an extra color up plate of magenta does the most work. I think you probably answer this one better than me.
Yeah. So personal experience, yellow is going to have the biggest impacts on greens. Bright yellows are already really easy to reproduce on press, so a particularly bright yellow won't be significantly different than just a normal bright yellow. Blues go absolutely crazy. The blue color space that we're able to reach using this is just absolutely nuts. Greens are still tricky to hit, so they're typically going to be more saturated and richer, but not necessarily brighter. And pinks are pretty impressively impacted as well. You can get some almost fluorescent pinks, although the true fluorescent ink still is better in that respect. But the blues, just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, they do pop a lot. I think the is it the Europa sample, the cyan blue kind of pops a bit more, whereas the regular CMYK, I think, kind of tilted a bit more magenta than we would even see on the screen and in the file.
Yeah, Europa is a really good example of that.
Right. Jason asked a really cool question, and I don't know if we know the answer to this one. So his question is, we were talking about how photos don't reproduce well or may not work well with ColorUp. Can you knock out the photographs in print? So I'm going to add a question to you, Alex. Can somebody set up one file that's RGB and CMYK?
They can.
Oh, you can. Okay.
There's a trick to it, though. The only program I've found that will make that work properly is InDesign. Photoshop and Acrobat, or Photoshop and Illustrator, both seem to want the file exclusively in one space or another. InDesign does allow for mixed color space elements. So you could absolutely set something up in InDesign where you could have some of it in RGB, some of it in CMYK, and the ColorUp process will only apply to the RGB elements.
Okay. I learned something today, folks. Good question, Jason. Thank you. Another question is, how does this process alter production times for larger runs? Are there possible artifacts of the process if parts that do and don't use this process? So Alex, that's you.
For production time, it's going to add, call it 15 to 20% onto the runtime of the job. So it's only when you start getting into extremely long runs that starts to become a concern. For shorter runs, it's negligible. Artifacts of the process, as long as it's proofed, you're going to get consistent output to the proof. What we don't want is to proof it in CMYK and then do the run in ColorUp and have you get a result that you're not expecting or not wanting.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the cool things about our press, it has a blanket, like an offset press, so it kind of has an old school element and a lot of high tech new stuff in it. And that blanket, it does need to be cleaned, but it happens during the press run. And Alex, to automate things, has programmed in cleaner sheets that will go through every certain number of press sheets that are printed to clean off the blanket. And I think I would want to say that is also why you don't have a lot of buildup and you end up having pretty good results without artifacts.
Reed, I see a good question. Does gloss cover render better results than something like the Mohawk Superfine Eggshell? Great question. Your choice of paper does actually have a pretty huge impact on the color output. Papers that reflect more light back to your eye are going to enable brighter colors just because you're getting more light back. So gloss stocks typically are going to have brighter colors than matte textured stocks. That goes all the way up to, there's it's called a cast coat material, which is almost like a mirror finish. Those can get some pretty crazy colors, and they also scratch if you so much as look at them funny. So we like to stick with like a traditional gloss as our, kind of top of the line.
So I guess we'd have to proof it. Well, so the specific call out on that question was, like a paper like Mohawk Superfine Eggshell. We love that paper, and it prints so nicely. And I always feel like for an uncoated paper, color tends to still look nice and saturated on that one. The next question is a good follow-up question. Diane asked, does it look, how does it look on like Crane's Letra? That's a really super uncoated, super toothy paper. Have we tested it on Letra?
We have actually. So I actually have some of the fine arts material we got in here for testing, and it's really pretty impressive across the board.
Okay.
The biggest impact there is picking a bright white paper, because that's the other impact on color. It's the brighter the white, the more that light reflects back to your eyes. So something like the Crane's fluorescent light fluorescent white paper will get you better color output than the Crane's, natural white.
Okay,
yeah, that's a good call out.
And just another call out on that's related to maybe both Reed's question and it's Diane's question. In the sample packet, if you have it handy, this particular piece of art, I don't know if you can see it, it looks like it's blurring out on my, it's the zombie worlds. We printed it on 100-pound eggshell cover. And we did the regular standard CMYK and the ColorUp, and you can tell a difference, but in my opinion, I feel like it is a little more muted compared to the samples that we printed on a more glossy stock. And some of that is just the art itself. But I wonder if it's not quite as pronounced on the uncoated. But that's just my theory.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny. We always learn something from these webinars. And these questions are great. In retrospect, it would have been cool if we printed, maybe one sample on many different stocks using RGB and CMYK, so that it can be compared. So we're going to remember that in the next webinar, next time we send out samples. So really good question. I really like this next one. Have you ever experimented with the order of ink laydown? Alex?
Yes, I have. So one of the cool things about our press is it's basically a very simple arrow menu where I can toggle the order of how things are set down on the page. And generally speaking, changing the order doesn't have too much of an effect on the color, but it can affect the quality. So sometimes I will, tweak the order that things go down, and that can affect the, it can reduce banding, things like that. But for color, generally not a huge effect.
Got it. These are all great questions. I really appreciate everybody for chiming in and, helping make this webinar better and more, a lot more learning is going to come out of it when everybody is involved. So thank you so much for that. It's 12:37, so we're doing great on time. Does anybody else have any questions or any suggestions for us, or even for the next webinar? If anybody's like, oh, I really want to learn about this, or even if you want to see a video of a machine in action and we can like really dig in on that, happy to do that. That's a lot of fun. Or, we can just send you guys videos of the shop puppies. That's always fun. So one more question. As a designer, is there a way to set up a spot plate for adding additional color intensity, or is this reliant on the software? There is a way to do that. So
the best way to do that, because with ColorUp, it is pretty much just it's a hands-off process. I don't get a whole lot of control over how that color interpretation happens in the back end, just how the press handles it when printing.
I have an
For
idea.
spot plates, the best solution that I've found is to actually run a swatch test using some like RGB hexadecimal codes or whatever you might be looking for. That way we can run that in both CMYK and in ColorUp, and you can see how those RGB elements are going to be directly impacted using ColorUp, and you can set your spot plates using that specific color code.
Well, so if somebody wanted to not use ColorUp, but kind of use the same theory of ColorUp, of adding an extra hit of any one color plate, if it was, for instance, if you wanted to do all of the cyan in a document or in a file, that's easy for us on the press. We can just tell the press to hit cyan twice. But if you're calling out a specific area that you wanted to add whatever cyan or magenta, I would think there's a way to do that by setting it up as a spot color. Maybe, call it HP white 1. And when it gets to the press, if they want it to be cyan, we can turn the white off and turn cyan off. There's a way to do this. I know there is.
Yeah, okay, so there definitely is, because there are options on the press to specifically support pre-separated files.
Yeah.
So I know there's a way to do it, probably out of most of the Adobe suite. It's just not something that I've ever personally tried.
But since you're the R&D guy, this is something that you
I can look into that for you.
Yeah. All right. That's a great question. We're gonna have to get back to everybody. I'm gonna read this one here. Okay, so you mentioned that you could print the RB and CMYK and see if something would benefit from ColorUp. If you wanted to design something that would maximize the benefit of ColorUp, can you talk a bit about how you think about the project before you even start designing? That's a great question. Yeah, RGB, got it.
That's a fantastic question.
So basically, the question is, what can a designer do from the get-go, knowing that they want to use ColorUp, knowing that they want their colors to be brighter? What can they do in the beginning to make that work?
So to start, Matt and Liz, I'll get with you guys on this, but I think we can probably put together like an RGB swatch test, just a sheet like this that we could send out with some examples. But one of the things that you can do in Photoshop, I know there's an option for a gamut warning that will tell you parts of the image that are outside of the CMYK gamut. That would be a good reference point for checking an existing file. But what I would do when designing is, so the Marty Bauman piece was a pretty extreme example. You really don't want to go that far because, like I said, there's only we can only push the color to a certain point on press. So that's never going to look screen accurate just because we never have the ability to do that. But you could definitely find your CMYK points that you would usually work with and then push it further. Just add some additional brightness, add some additional color saturation. If it breaks good CMYK design principles, it's probably a good candidate for ColorUp. So you have to think more web design than print design.
So Reed also mentions that maybe leaning into blue and pink might provide benefit, and that sounds like a good idea too. Blue, pink, and even green seems to really help. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And then Brent asked, have you tested this process on colored paper with white ink layered down first? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, actually, I wish I'd brought the sample over here. We did one a little while back, which was ColorUp on a black paper with white ink underneath, and the results were just stunning. It's still one of my favorite prints that we've done, and it's absolutely eye-searing, the level of contrast that we got out of it.
That's not the May Kirkpatrick, is it? Is that a different
No,
one?
that's the squirrel one I have up in the press room.
Very cool. That's another great question. Well, I think that might be the end of the questions, which is totally fine. You guys have asked a lot of great questions, and we really appreciate you being involved. And really, it's so amazing to us that so many people are interested in what we're doing and take some time out of their day to join us. And we thank you for your time. And if you do have any questions that you think about, feel free to call us or email us. If anybody needs, if you're like working on a project and you want to test some files, just let us know. Send us the files. We're happy to test them for you. This is all kind of part of the fun of learning. And as we dig in more to ColorUp, we'll learn more and happy to share at any time.
I just have one more question actually that just
Yeah.
came up. If you were to print on like a blue paper with white ink and then ColorUp, would it like really, really maximize the blues, or do you think it would not have an effect?
It would be an interesting effect, but it wouldn't necessarily be more impactful than just printing ColorUp on white paper. When we put the white ink underneath the CMYK, that's basically taking the place of that white paper because you have to have that some kind of white substrate for that light to bounce off of and come back to your eye. That's why if you print just CMYK on blue paper, you get a very, very dark kind of muted effect. So you add that white ink first to get that reflection back, and at that point, the color is pretty similar as it would be if you just printed on white paper to begin with.
Also happy to test it.
Yeah.
We'll send that to California.
So if anybody has any ideas on future webinar topics, feel free to email me. I put my email in the chat, but you can also email anyone at the shop. They'll take your feedback and pass it along to me for future planning. And then we will be sending out the recording of this webinar, and you will probably get it sometime next week. I think that's all the announcements I have, Matt.
That's it. Thank you all. So good to hang with you for a little bit. Have a good day.